Very useful introduction to this exciting topic, and I'm absolutely delighted to be with all of you today and to introduce my panel. But let me just start with a few opening comments about this journey from open banking to open finance. The opportunities are clearly there, and the advantages, we've heard so many of them: consumer financial information aggregation and visibility, innovation, reducing costs, reducing friction, innovating in the sector to provide better services at a lower cost for all different members, serving the unbanked, integrated financial services, including the MSMEs as well. Loads and loads of opportunities, but we still have a lot of challenges that we need to also address around consent, digital identity, API standards, security, enforcement, data portability. We've heard about a lot of them. And we're going to explore some of that in the next 25 minutes with my amazing panel. So my name is Vivienne Artz, and I'm passionate about data strategy, privacy policy, financial crime, and diversity and inclusion. So what could be better for open banking and open finance? I'm going to hand over to Alastair, if you'd like to start to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Ali Douglas. I'm the CEO of TotallyMoney. We have 5 million customers in the UK who we help to improve their credit score.
Hi, Adriana, Ennab, Credit Suisse, Director of Public Policy, covering all of the digital topics, including data, open finance, privacy, and everything that's thrown in here today.
I'm Richard Fenner, Director of Government Relations for Euroclear. We're the financial market infrastructure that settles securities in the UK, and we account for about half of the money going in and out of the Bank of England each day.
Hi, I'm Liam Gray. I lead Plaid's account management and implementation team in Europe. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Plaid, we're an open banking and open finance platform that serves more than 7,000 fintechs globally, as well as connecting into more than 12,000 financial institutions. Looking forward to talking all things open banking and open finance today.
And Plaid is a fashion trend too.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Markos Zachariadis. I'm an academic. I'm a professor of information systems and financial technologies at Alliance Manchester Business School at the University of Manchester, and also part of the World Economic Forum's Council on Responsive Financial Systems.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much. One of the important things about innovation is not leaving people behind. And so, Alastair, I want to talk to you, or rather you talk to me and everybody else, a bit about your focus on inclusion and how this move from open banking to open finance can really help us realize our inclusion objectives, because there are so many who are not included.
Sure. Well, just to set the context, we did some research last year which showed that the number of consumers in the UK who are underserved by the mainstream financial institutions has grown massively to 20 million over the last 8 years, up from 14 million. And that is not just because of the obvious drivers such as the cost of living crisis, corona dislocation, but it's also because of changing trends such as young people not trusting banks, people moving around a lot more, and that kind of thing, which means that the traditional ways that lending and banking happened, relying on a credit report and other types of data that people expected to see, just aren't there, or they're not joined up in the right way. So therefore people lose out because they don't fit into the system, even though it's through no fault of their own. So I think the way that open banking and the move to open finance will help this is it allows you to do something with your data and kind of use it for your own benefit, and allows the banks and the industry to kind of build up a more complete picture of you rather than relying on some of the really decades-old ways they've done things in the past.
And so that's leveraging different elements of information about your credit history, your payments and such like in order to build that credit picture? Absolutely, yeah. That's fantastic. It. You get like a 360-degree view of that customer rather than just a snapshot in time, which may or may not be accurate depending on some of these vagaries of the way things have worked. And do you think that's going to be more accurate as well in terms of assessing credit risk? I think the more data, the better. Obviously then there's a separate question about what people do with it, but I think the more data, the better. Then you ought to be able to make better decisions and have a better service for people. Fantastic. Liam, we were speaking a little bit earlier, and we had a bit of a joke going that actually you're focused on the plumbing of making this actually happen. So having all of these ambitions is one thing, to have the objectives before us, but how is that actually working in terms of the infrastructure? You're very much focused on the UK. Could you give us a sense of how the infrastructure is working in the UK and a little bit more of an international perspective as well?
Absolutely. I'm a very proud financial data plumber, by the way. So, but on a serious note, we have really set the standard in the UK, as in from a regulatory standpoint, as in the third-party providers that have actually created the infrastructure to do that. So I'm very sort of like happy with the standard that we've created here, and it's made our lives very, very easy in terms of taking that data and applying it to use cases like those that Alastair has mentioned. For example, serving excluded, underserved, and to be honest, the masses as well, because there are so many different data gaps that are there right now that can be plugged with open banking and open finance data. So it's massively important what we're doing, and the UK is doing a really, really good job of it, which is worth mentioning. However, that's not the case absolutely everywhere. So there is sort of a gap in terms of where the standards are here and where they are elsewhere, and we really need to make sure that we close that gap. And when we do move from open banking to open finance and finally open data, we need to make sure that those standards are held throughout so that we're not recreating the wheel again and again and again. It needs to be additive. We need to be building on those foundations that we've got to make sure that it actually makes sense and this data is portable and it can actually be used in various different ways. And it's not really sort of like rigid to one provider or one bank, for example.
Yeah, I love that phrase, you know, standards are only standards if they're actually adopted, and we need to be using the same standards so that they become exactly that and we can achieve the interoperability. Adriana, you are a policy expert, but what is one of the other challenges around the adoption of open banking and then open finance?
Well, I think that the standards, as we discussed earlier, is incredibly important. The interoperability, the ability to use this cross-border harmonization. I think when we look at PSD2 and open banking, there was a huge cost to the banks without really any benefit, which is why there was a lot of kickback or a lot of pushback, I should say. So the one thing that we've been pushing for is to ensure that there's horizontal data sharing. So that's two-way data sharing. So that is, if you look at monetizing the data, then that would be one way. There are obviously other ways, but if you have data going in both directions. But there's something that I wanted to discuss is one of the things we were actually pushing for, strangely, because everyone said the banks didn't want open banking, was to skip open finance and move to open data. So what we realized, though, is that's really difficult because I think the financial services have the ability to put this system in place, and the other sectors that we would bring in would, according to the regulators, and we agree with them, learn from us and the structure that we put in place. But if you look at the unbanked, for instance, because if you look at open finance, you're thinking open finance will include mortgages, will include pensions, will include maybe insurance. How many of the unbanked actually have pensions and mortgages and insurance? So there's a whole section that actually will benefit only when it moves to open data, and that open data will include telecoms, and it will include utilities, and will include all the other things where all payments are made and where a lot of people's where their salaries are spent or the money that they're bringing in is spent. So that's something that we would like to move towards, and we think that that will really help the unbanked and financial inclusion. So going back to the original question, which is, so the standards, the horizontal data sharing, the interoperability, I think it's incredibly important to look at this also from a global standard setter level so that there are at least sort of like a jigsaw puzzle of pieces that fit together, and if they're not identical in, say, in the EU or the UK or the US or Switzerland, that they can fit together so that the plumbing will work, and you have that, I don't know what those things that connect the plumbing, the connectors together that allows you to do those transactions. We're a global economy. People travel a lot, as you said, especially younger people are moving around a lot, and you want to be able to take that data with you. And something we discussed earlier is the discussion on portability. It's just never really portable, and that's something we really need to get to. So there's a lot of things that we need to solve for. But I think they're solvable. And, the gentleman speaking before at the CFIT, I think, it's fantastic. We have all these different people, but everyone seems to be very committed to do it. And with someone as enthusiastic as he is, I think it's possible.
So the lawyer in me just can't help but saying this, but it's one thing to have the plumbing in place to allow the interoperability and the free flow of data, but can we get the legal provisions in place as well to allow that free flow of data? But Markos, I'm going to come to you next. You've been looking at open banking and open finance from an academic perspective. You've done loads of reports in this space. What do you think? Are we achieving the ambitions we set out to achieve in terms of the innovation that open banking and open finance can bring to both business as well as individuals? And what do you think success is or should be looking like?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, it's a big question. I think there's a lot more way in terms of innovation development. I'm quite confident that we haven't seen enough yet. There's still a long way to go. But I think, one thing is to look at the use cases, and for that, I think the infrastructure must be there, so the APIs must be there, the openness of data and the regulation must be there. And of course, we definitely welcome all the developments around the announcements that JROC did in terms of the provision for the future entity and how the industry, in open finance is going to move forward in developing the infrastructure further, providing more assurances for TPPs and also for consumers. So we definitely need to have more use cases. And education is needed both on the side of consumers, but also on the side of the providers of the data, ASPs, for example, right? Because you can educate consumers, but also you have to educate organizations that will share the data, understand what are the new business models that they could be operating upon, how they can make money, what are the new kinds of economic incentives they need to be working with in order to develop their infrastructure from their side, make data more available, on top of regulation. So I think it's the question of measuring the economic benefits is also something that we've looked at quite a bit. Unfortunately, for now, we don't have any papers or reports at hand that provide concrete evidence that open banking has added, for instance, onto the productivity of the UK or the productivity of the sector overall. But some preliminary findings that we have done, broadly speaking, for example, in US institutions, banks that have opened up their data more, ASPs, for example, equivalent ASPs that have opened up the data more, we can see that they correlate with better financial performance, more productivity gains in terms of their operating models, for example. So that's a little bit of piece of evidence that we're very keen to do an equivalent study in the UK as well.
And what do you think is a better model to promote faster and wider adoption? Is it the regulatory-led approach, which is what the EU is doing? Is it the standards approach, which is what the UK has done? Or is it the business-led approach, the market approach in the US? Because we've seen the US is making some great progress at the moment. I hope they're not going to overtake us.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. I think we can borrow from examples in other industries, for example, in terms of regulation, enforcing openness of markets. We've seen that in telecommunications. We've seen that in different industries the past few decades, for example. I think it's very difficult to kind of force an entire industry to operate in a particular way so that you can realize benefits. I think innovation certainly comes from initiatives, and regulation should go as far as opening up or creating an infrastructure, and then kind of providing the inspiration to the use cases, for example, so they can develop new products and services for consumers. I think that's going to be the winning recipe, the actual use cases in the end, and how consumers can realize these benefits. I think that's a really important piece that we're missing perhaps a little bit at the moment, or a lot.
I think a little bit of an example like what the UK has done with the digital ID. I think if you remember years ago, there was a referendum and people in the UK said, absolutely not, we don't want a type of an identity, a government identity. They trust the government as a backstop, but not with that data. But they trust the banks with their money and with the data. So what they did was, I think, the best of both worlds, which is that the GCMS came up with the framework, and that whoever decided to set up a digital identity had to follow this framework, but it was led by the market. So there was that integration between the regulators and the market that seems to be works well together. So whatever it is that they're good at, that's what they provide, to provide security to the consumer.
Yeah, the digital identity or digital verification is such an important element of this. But Richard, you're coming at it from a slightly different angle. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so our CREST settlement system 30 years ago electronified securities, the vast majority of securities in the UK. So in a certain way, we can be thought of as Britain's original fintech, if you like. And what the government is doing now is looking to digitize securities, and the digitization task force is taking that forward. I think there are real opportunities in this area as we extend into open finance to think about those use cases. So for example, one of the ambitions of the digitization task force is to make it easier for companies to communicate with their investor base and vice versa. And so I think that there's real promise in looking at other markets. So Sweden is a good example where they have married digital ID with a single digital register for shareholdings in order to really empower fintechs and innovative companies to find new ways to serve issuers and investors.
So it's interesting, Adriana gave us this taste of open data and the possibilities if we actually make the data open. Open banking was the use case, which is like the vehicle to show us what could actually happen. I think you've just spoken about the B2B opportunities, because we have very much been focusing on individuals and consumers and my personal bank account, what I can see about myself on my phone, et cetera, and that aggregation piece, but there really is an important B2B, taking out the friction, enabling investors and stakeholders to have greater insight. It's more transparency as well. So there's a really strong B2B case as well, which I don't think often gets as perhaps well articulated as some of the consumer pieces.
Absolutely, and a lot of folks are crying out for more competition in certain areas, and open data is a way to break down where there are silos of data, and competition can be furthered through these new technologies that we have now.
Fantastic. But Alastair, we have to think of that all-important word, which is trust. And I think that's something that we talked about in our earlier discussion, is individual consumer trust in the system. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, having worked in insurance for many years, trust is everything. And our mantra at TotallyMoney is that your financial data should work for you, not against you. And there's a big part of trust in that. And I think it's like any service, like you need to demonstrate trust by the way that you treat your customers and take a customer-centric approach. But I think all of that kind of talk that comes from the industry doesn't necessarily mean anything without regulation and strict standards around what you can do with data, which is really important. We don't want a situation like what we had with everyone playing Farmville on Facebook and suddenly exfiltrated data in kind of Cambridge Analytica and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that was just social media data. Imagine the consequences if you had that with the sensitivity that you have with financial information. So I think it's incredibly important. I think we are seeing innovation, but I think it shouldn't be allowed to happen just like willy-nilly. I think there should be strict rules, and I think by and large that's happening in the UK, and we're seeing the benefits.
Fantastic. So the security and the trust element are very deeply interconnected. Liam, I wonder if I could just come to you, because I mean, obviously being the plumbing man here, security is obviously a hugely key element of that. Could you just talk a little bit more about that part of it?
Yeah, and I think that ties into the point that Markos made around education. So if people don't understand the product, it's very easy to be worried about the security around the product. And when I say people, I mean both the end consumer and our clients who we're working with, who are actually leveraging that data. So education is massively important in making sure that everyone feels, one, comfortable using open banking products, and two, connecting their bank account in the first place. Because if you don't feel that comfort in understanding what's happening, how that data's moving, how secure it is, you're never going to actually use the products in the first place. So it's not just important to know about the security for security purposes, but for there to be the adoption that we need in the market.
Yeah, and that was your point, the consumer actually having control, that I can trust it and I control it.
I think just very quickly, I think that's the crucial point. And I think earlier someone said no one knows what open banking is, and I think that's true, but I don't think you need to know what the words open banking means. You just need to understand what's happening with your data. That's crucial. And then reap the benefits from the fact that something clever is happening. So I don't think we need to kind of raise awareness of the word open banking with consumers. I think we need to have services that work really well and you can trust.
And I might just add from the wholesale side, adding to security and privacy is resilience, right? When you're talking about systemic markets, that's absolutely crucial, and supervisors rightly expect that we have those operationally resilient architectures within the financial system.
I was going to say, I think in a couple of years, the conference, the topic that we'll be talking about is how do we scale up? How do we get more uptake? And I do think that the uptake will only happen if people actually understand the basics. Because I said, if I didn't work in this industry, I would never have even really known about open banking. It's not something that was, may have come in some things that were sent to me by my bank, but not anything I'll really read. But how does this work for me? Why is it important? Why should I be doing this? And a lot of it happens in the background. It's something that we're not even aware of is happening, and it's making, banking obviously easier for us, on our phone. But to then move to open finance, to start putting other products in there, to start looking at it, and to actually not just to have it on your phone, to be able to use it, as Liam said, and to make it worth your while and to make it worth, that's how you have more uptake. That's how you have more consumers involved in it. That's how you take the next level. But there are, and generally speaking, when you talk about the unbanked, they will also most likely not have the ability to get that information. So how do you set that up? I know that there was one bank that was having, that had sort of, a few hours a week where you bring people in that didn't have computers at home. We're teaching them how to use some of the systems or sending people to their homes. I mean, things like this, it seems silly, but I think if you really want that uptake and if you want to work towards for financial inclusion on the unbanked, then we need to look at that at work as well. And the education, I think, is unbelievably important.
And we need to be much more creative about how we do that.
Much more creative. And it's not difficult, but it's just thinking about it, because you say, look, this is great, we think it's great, let's move forward, let's do it. But you're not bringing everyone with you.
Okay, we have 1 minute left. By my calculations, you've got 10 seconds each, which means I need one tagline. I'm going to start with you, Markos. What is a final thought you want to leave with our participants today?
Yeah, just to say, obviously, open finance, open data financial services, kind of more general, I think has the potential to really transform the entire industry. I mean, our studies show that it can transform firms at the firm level. It can change completely competitive dynamics at the industry level and have productivity effects for the economy. I think it's really important to look at the future business models in this kind of open finance, open data era. And have a better grip on how you can utilize these for economic benefits at the firm level gains, but also to serve benefits to consumers.
Thank you. Liam?
I'll keep mine super simple. Standards, standards, standards. So technical standards, data standards, that's what we need in order to actually make this scale beyond just open banking to open finance and open data.
And I think I love standards because they're cross-border, so it doesn't need to rely on a local jurisdiction. So absolutely spot on. Thank you. Richard?
Where the UK has been successful, let's build on that success. And where we've been a little bit behind, let's look at the learnings of competitor jurisdictions and have the ambition to try to leapfrog them.
Fantastic. Let's be inquisitive and learn.
I agree with all my panelists, and I would just say education, standards, and interoperability.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I agree with everyone, and yeah, let's build some good stuff which works to help use the tech to make things better for people. Let's not screw things up. Let's realize some upside. Yeah.
Fantastic. And data for me is the driver in all of this. We need to use it creatively and responsibly, and together we can actually make it madly successful. But the data is the key. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Thank you very much to our panelists for sharing your fantastic insights. Thank you.